So the book really came together though as an idea when I spoke at Seek back in Salt Lake City in January, because I realized there's this whole chain of all these pieces that are part of the definition of feminism. And then when I looked at them more concretely, I realized, this is actually a shadow church because there's all of these elements that we have in the church that actually sort of keep us grafted into the church on a cultural level. We know how to act, we know how to behave, we can kind of order our emotions around it. All of those things happen in the church, and feminism has them as well. And so this was just this incredible realization that, feminism has its own set of commandments. People have heard me talk about this all the time. Really, contempt for men, promiscuity, and the occult. Those three elements. Just that they came about in the early 1800s, and now we can still see them on college campuses and among influencers. This hasn't changed at all. Um, Also, just the emotions are another key piece. Feminism has really manipulated women's emotions in all kinds of ways over the centuries, actually, and for very good effect, because women, when they're angry, will be much more motivated and active and involved in fighting for what they think is just. And that's, a real motivating factor. So instead of the theological virtues of faith, hope, and love, we've got the feminist virtues of contempt, envy, and rage, which you can see, go to any women's march and all of them are on display. So anyway, it was just, and I think too, I've had the question. I met a young man at one point who was a college student. He was just talking about how hard it is to move a woman on sort of the needle of feminism, to start recognizing like maybe this isn't really all it's cracked up to be. And it was, sort of his comment in passing that helped me really see the reason it's hard is because we have all of these layers, all these pieces that the shadow church has established so that women are plugged into the ideology almost in a cult-like way because their activities are governed by it, their thoughts are governed by it, their decisions are governed by it. So anyway, it just seemed really important to unmask that. And, of course, there's a sacrament, all of those rites, all of those kinds of things. So that was the main idea. But the nice thing is that it's very, I feel like I'm not dealing with sort of these lower arguments and picking and choosing on, who said what and when. I feel like I've got kind of a big overview of what feminism is and what it's become and sort of the waves of it and the way, the undulations throughout the centuries. So to start being able to abstract some of the specifics that most people don't normally see, but then on the other hand, take those specifics and just show that they just clearly don't line up with anything Catholic. So that's been that's kind of the real trajectory of it, at least the first half of it. And then, of course, we'll move into something more positive thereafter.
So fascinating. So it really does seem like I like the word trilogy because it does seem like you went from the Anti-Married, End of Woman, and now this book. And what do
Mm,
you think is the so you went into some of the distinctions of how this is different.
right.
You've done the whole history thing,
Right.
but now it seems like I feel like you've talked about how you're employing other thinkers that you hadn't really
Hmm.
brought into
Yeah.
the conversation before that are
Right.
really exciting. So what can you tell me a little bit more about that?
Yeah. Yeah, so there's going to be one chapter at least. It might be threaded throughout more of the book. I haven't quite decided yet, but there's a man named Ian McGilchrist that I have recently met when I was in London at ARC, actually. But I was it was really fangirling him. It's just this. I read his book this past summer, and I had been sitting on my shelf. Someone had recommended it years ago, and I just could not get enough of this book, and I'll tell you about it in a second. But I think I've read it now 5 times. There's certain sections that I've read repeatedly that are just so prescient and amazing. And McGilchrist he's a Scotsman. He's a retired psychiatrist. He's a neuroscientist. He's got, I think he taught literature at Oxford before he became an MD, and he knows philosophy inside out. He's very much a polymath and just this amazing character of, just amazing man. It was such an honor to meet him. But in any event, he's got this theory that's fascinating because he adds a science element to it. So it's in a lot of ways it's familiar to those who've already studied philosophy to a certain degree, but he makes this distinction between left hemisphere and right hemisphere. Left brain, right brain is sort of how we think about it, but we think of it in very poppy terms, and which he says these are wrong. The right brain and the left brain always work together, but what's the difference is, and his whole theory is bound around this idea of that the right hemisphere is meant to be in charge, and that's it has a certain orientation to the world. It understands context, it understands emotion, it understands the particular, it understands individuals, love. All of those kinds of things are sort of packed into the right hemisphere. The left hemisphere is much more like what you would expect from the Enlightenment thinkers. It's very abstract. It's very, it can pull out and categorize things very, very easily. It's also about power, control, and competition. The other thing that's really fascinating about it is that it thinks it's always right. Like it doesn't, it's totally infallible because it doesn't have access to the right brain that things that it doesn't know. So his whole theory is we're meant to be ordered with the right brain, but what can happen is the left brain can take over because we don't their balance is lost oftentimes because of culture. And I think, looking at what you're talking about, what I'm talking about, the culture has very much moved to this kind of abstraction, and women in particular are actually very susceptible to it. I think because our compassion can be shifted away from the particular. And, I think this is what has kept women sort of rooted in the right hemisphere is that we dealt with our children, our garden, our homes, very concrete things that were close to us that we had to navigate on all these different emotional levels. You couldn't just say, all my children need this, each one, their specifics. But what happens when you take a woman out of the home, and we know, the rate of childlessness for women is what's really shooting through the roof right now in terms of the birth dearth that we're dealing with. It's not because families are having fewer children, it's because there's so many more women not having children. So the left hemisphere can shift and take over. And one actually, just as an aside, one of the most interesting things was just how they discovered this, and it was people with strokes that had different parts of the brain that were shut down, and they could sort of see the activities that were going on. And
Mm.
one woman described how she had the damage was in her right hemisphere, I think, and so her left hemisphere would actually grab for clothing. She would go to pick out a shirt, and her right hand, which is part of associated with the left hemisphere, would grab an article of clothing that she did not herself want to wear. She
Huh.
would have to come, like her daughter would have to come and get her to like let go of it. Like the left
Oh,
hemisphere was that
interesting.
powerful. Anyway, just really fascinating stories like that that really, he drives home the balance of it. So in any event, long story short, the thing that's fascinated me most about this is that what I see in feminism, this it's about power, it's about control, it's about autonomy. It doesn't engage in history, context, emotions. You and I have done a lot of reading of Erica Commissar's work, her book Being There, and just that the importance of being properly attached, mother and child being properly attached. She speaks a great deal about how we've gotten to the point where women are having a hard time feeling empathetic towards their own children. And I think this is all connected to it because if you become so left brain oriented, then it's very hard to see the particular needs of your own child and in that context. So anyway, but he also, has just an incredible way of writing and storytelling that feels obviously very right-brained and balanced. And so I think that theory is going to be a really powerful one for people to really start thinking through, what is that's happening on a cultural level? How is this affecting us, just even as women? And then how do we start correcting this and how do we raise our daughters so that they're not in this automatic place where they're immediately focused on power and control, choice, um, you know, competition, and with this, strong sense that they're right about everything. That's really a bad place to be. And that's exactly what we see in, almost all of these ideologies is that kind of behavior. So it's
Hmm.
it's really interesting.
It reminds me of that quote in Dostoevsky, the more I love humanity, the less I
Hmm.
love the person in front of me.
Right. That's
Or the
exactly.
order of Morris, it's sort of the
Hmm.
opposite, the ordo Morris.
Yeah.
Um,
Right. No, and I think that's the fascinating part is you can see this. There was a book I read right before McGilchrist's called The Cave and the Light, and it was basically going through all of history and talking about um, Plato and Aristotle. And Plato is very much the abstraction, make everything uniform, make your culture and your
yeah,
society, the
norms.
Right, it's all very ordered, exactly, and the form, exactly, the forms, and then Aristotle's very much here we are in the specific and the particular and focused on that, and the, you know, the household, the family, all of those kinds of things. So anyway, and it goes all through history, this book does. So it was really interesting to
Wow.
then sort of look at that within the context of left brain, right brain, and how, you know, how do we bring a real balance to that in a way that's ordered and beautiful. And I think that as Catholics, we certainly have all of those things at our fingertips, you know, everything from smells and bells at mass and the liturgy, and just, you know, things like the theological virtues of faith, hope, and love. We have storytelling, we have music, you know, those are the pieces that I think are just so vital that we've often lost because we really try to, you know, the culture really focuses on a lot of abstraction in really
Yeah.
ways.
It seems like we could boil down the problems of the world to we make abstract what should be particular and we particularize things that are abstract, you know?
I think, well, maybe that's it. We don't need to write these books after all.
It's just, you
No.
know, that theme comes up in my book too. I'm actually coming up with this phrase called crisis. Well, I think I talked to you about, I think, crisis hijacking or pity
Mm,
piggybacking, but the
right.
idea that we relinquish or we attenuate principles that are enduring, that ought to be enduring by focusing on particular
Yes.
crises. And so insofar as we
Yeah.
can like, you know, like I might need to demythologize my family because it's abusive, for example. Mine is not, but you know, theoretically or hypothetically. And then
Mhm.
we use that personal crisis to then demythologize the family universally. You know that
That, yeah,
I
and
do.
that's exactly what happened. You know, I talk about that a great deal in The End of Woman, just all the brokenness of every single feminist. The goal isn't, you know, how do I help families become better? It's how do I get rid of the family? How do I get rid of this situation that broke me, and you know, through which I was broken, and you know, now I can't see clearly. The only clarity that I can see is just get rid of it. And you know, so feminism really is in many respects, I think, just a reaction to brokenness, in a way to sort of try to protect ourselves by not being vulnerable to someone else around us. And I think that's really the tragedy, is that we've made it into something that's supposed to be, you know, about equality and justice, when in fact it's not about that at all. It's really, you know, there's so many things happening on emotional level and layers that we're not aware of, and that are really driving and motivating it, and keeping it, perpetuating it, I should say.
Oh, I can't wait to read the book. I feel like it's going to be super interesting, and it's exciting that it's coming out this year, by the end of this
Yeah,
year, I hope. So, very
yeah.
exciting.
No, thank you. I'm really excited about it too. It feels like, you know, it's one of those things. It doesn't. It's hard because it's just hard to write a book, but it's
Yeah,
nice that all the ideas feel mature and um,
they're all
y-
in you. Yeah,
exactly. It's not like I'm doing all this research and trying to figure out what I'm going to say. You know, I have a real sense of clarity, and I think also just even trying to think through just those positive aspects of motherhood, and just, you know, the fierceness with which we fight for our children when we really are ordered in the particular, in the right hemisphere towards what it is that we're meant to love. You know, it's that great line of Mother Teresa's, "Go, if you want to change the world, go home and love your children." Well, it makes sense within this right hemisphere idea, instead of just trying to save everyone like we tend to in the culture. You know, it really is particularized that I'm one woman and I need to love these people in front of me, and through that, that's really, how I become a much better woman, and the world becomes a much better place too. So, anyway, I'm excited about the content. It just feels like it's really timely
yeah.
and really needed, and it's not just Catholics either. I met a number of Christians, and know a lot of Christians that are struggling with the same issues within the, you know, Protestant framework. That I think this will really help start bringing some clarity to the issue.